I had been driving alone for hours on a stretch of highway that seemed to have no end. The road cut through thick forest, and the sky had grown darker quicker than I expected. The sun had slipped behind the trees, and the heavy clouds above made it look later than it really was. I kept the radio on, not for the music, but for the comfort of sound. The station was faint, buzzing in and out with static. I didn't care about the song playing. I just needed the noise to fight the silence that pressed against the windows of my car. The farther I drove, the fewer signs I saw. No billboards, no gas stations, no houses tucked behind tree lines. Just endless pavement and black woods on either side. I checked my phone more than once, but the signal bar had been gone for over an hour. My GPS had frozen miles back, the map stuck in one place, the blue dot refusing to move. I told myself I'd be fine, that the road had to lead somewhere, that all I had to do was keep driving. The radio crackled, breaking the low hum of my engine. The static got sharper, more jagged until the music vanished altogether. At first I thought the station had cut out because I was so far from anywhere. But then I realized the sound wasn't just empty static. It was something else mixed in. Underneath the hiss, faint and almost lost, I could hear what sounded like voices. Not talking, not calm. They were panicked, ragged, sharp noises that made me grip the steering wheel tighter. Screams. The hair on my arm stood straight. I reached for the dial, thinking maybe I had misheard. But when I twisted the knob, the music didn't return. Just static, and beneath the static, the screams. Long, uneven, overlapping, like more than one person. Some sounded distant, like they were far away, while others were close enough to sound like they were inside the car with me. I froze. My foot lifted slightly off the gas and the car slowed. For a few seconds I didn't breathe. My eyes darted between the road and the radio, as if the small black box in the dash could explain itself. The noise didn't stop. It didn't fade. The screams pushed through the static like someone trying to claw their way out of the dark. I told myself it had to be interference. Old emergency broadcasts bleeding in. Maybe even some prank station. But no matter what I tried to tell myself, I couldn't shake the sound. It was too real. Too human. I thought about turning the radio off, but something in me couldn't. As terrifying as it was to listen, the silence without it would have been worse. The trees outside grew denser, pressing against the edge of the highway. The light faded even more until it felt like I was driving inside a tunnel made of branches. My headlights carved a narrow beam ahead of me, and everything beyond them was just black. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting uselessly near the radio dial, unable to turn it off. Minutes dragged. My breathing was shallow. Every scream that pushed through the static scraped down my spine. Then suddenly the radio went completely silent. Not even static, just dead air. The relief I felt lasted less than a second, because even after the radio had gone quiet, I could still hear the screams. They were faint at first, like the sound was lingering in my ears. I thought it was my imagination, the after effect of listening too hard. But as I drove, the sound grew sharper, clearer. It wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was outside. I rolled the window up tight, though it was already closed. My ears strained, trying to place the direction. The screams didn't come from ahead or behind. They seemed to bleed out from the forest on both sides of the road. They rose and fell, sometimes distant, sometimes so close I felt like if I stopped the car and stepped outside, someone would be standing right there in the ditch, screaming up at me. I pressed my foot on the gas harder. The engine whined and the car sped up. The faster I went, the louder the wind roared against the car, but it didn't drown the screams. They only grew sharper. I don't know how long I drove like that. My knuckles were white on the wheel. My chest ached from breathing too fast. I wanted the road to end, to reach a town, a gas station, a single sign of life that wasn't hidden behind black trees. But the road stretched on. I checked the dashboard clock. It said 7:42. I checked again a few minutes later. It still said 7:42. I tapped it with my finger. Nothing changed. The screams went on. Some were long and broken, as if someone was choking on their own voice. Others were short, sharp bursts that cut into me like blades. And then I started to notice details. In the mess of noise, I could pick out individual voices. A man's voice deep and rough, a woman's high and sharp, then a child's small and cracking. They overlapped and tangled until I couldn't tell one from the other, but I knew what I heard. Every instinct told me to keep driving, not to stop for anything. But as I rounded a slow bend in the highway, my headlights swept across something on the shoulder. Shape. I almost missed it, but my eyes caught it in time. I slowed down, my stomach dropping. It was a car. Old, rusted, the paint stripped off in places. It sat half on the shoulder, half in the ditch, angled like it had skidded off the road. The headlights were off, but the driver's side door was wide open. The car looked dead, abandoned, but there was something about it that felt wrong. I pulled to the far side of the lane as I passed it. My eyes locked on that open door. For a split second, my headlights lit up the inside. The seats were torn, the dashboard smashed, but what made my chest tighten was the smear of dark stains across the inside of the windshield. Thick, uneven, like something had burst against it. I kept going. My hands shook so badly I could barely keep the car steady. My brain screamed at me not to stop, not to look back, just keep going forward. The farther I drove, the louder the screaming got. It was everywhere now. The trees, the sky, inside the car, inside my head. I pressed my palms against my ears, but it didn't help. It was like the sound was coming from inside me, vibrating in my bones. My chest heaved, my vision blurred. Then ahead in the road I saw movement. A figure stepped out from the trees. I slammed the brakes, the car skidding hard on the asphalt. My seatbelt locked, my chest slammed against it. The tires screamed against the pavement until the car jerked to a stop just a few feet from the figure. My heart pounded so hard I thought I would black out. It was a man. Or at least it looked like one. His clothes were shredded, his face shadowed by my headlights. He didn't move, didn't flinch even though I had nearly hit him. He just stood there, his head tilted slightly to one side, his arms limp at his sides. The screaming had stopped. The silence hit harder than the noise had. My ears rang. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly they cramped. I waited for him to move, to step closer, to do anything. He didn't. I thought about honking the horn, but something in me knew not to. The air felt heavy, thick, like if I made a single sound it would break whatever thin thread was holding the moment together. Then, slowly, he turned his head. Not his body, just his head. The movement was stiff, unnatural, like his neck didn't work right. My headlights lit his face. His skin was pale, stretched thin. His eyes were wide, too wide, the whites gleaming. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. His face was twisted like he was screaming, but the silence was complete. I couldn't take it. I slammed my foot on the gas. The car lurched forward. For a second, I thought I was going to hit him, but the moment the headlights flared, he was gone. The road ahead was empty. My chest heaved. My vision swam. I didn't know if I had imagined him, if the screams had broken something in my head. But I kept driving faster, not daring to look in the mirrors. The forest blurred past me, the road endless. When I finally saw lights, I almost cried. A glow in the distance, faint at first, then brighter. Streetlights, buildings, a town. My hands shook so badly I nearly lost control, but I forced myself to stay steady until I rolled into the edge of the town. The streets were empty. No cars, no people, but the lights were on. Storefronts lit up. Traffic lights changing. Everything looking normal but dead quiet. I pulled into the first gas station I saw and parked under the bright fluorescent lights. I shut the engine off. The sudden silence was crushing. I sat there, hands still gripping the wheel, chest still heaving. For the first time in hours, I couldn't hear the screams. But when I reached for the radio dial, my hand froze, the radio was still off, and yet, from somewhere deep inside the town, faint and thin, I heard them again. The same screams carried on the wind. And I knew then it didn't matter how far I drove or where I stopped. The radio going silent hadn't been the end. It had only been the beginning. I had been driving for hours through the back roads, the kind of roads that didn't even show up on most maps anymore. The kind of routes where you passed more fields and trees than people. The night had settled in heavy, darker than it should have been. with no moon and a ceiling of clouds that kept the sky sealed shut. My old truck groaned under the strain of the uneven road, headlights pushing forward into the emptiness like weak arms trying to hold back the dark. I had the radio on low, static mixing with the faint voice of some distant station, just enough to remind me that I wasn't the only person alive out there in all that emptiness. The sound of the radio had been steady, its weak signal coming and going with the turns in the road, but then it cut off. It didn't fade or crackle like it usually did. It just stopped, as if someone had yanked the plug from the wall. I reached out to the dial, tapping it, turning it up, spinning through the stations. All I got was silence, not even static. It was like the thing had died in that exact second. I sat there staring at it for a moment, my fingers still on the knob. But then something came through the truck that froze me more than the silence did. It was a scream, not through the radio. Not in my head. A real, raw scream that cut straight through the trees outside. It was distant but sharp, the kind of sound that didn't belong in a place so empty. I sat frozen at the wheel, trying to convince myself it had been some kind of animal, maybe a fox or a coyote, but I had spent enough nights outdoors to know the difference between an animal's cry and a human voice breaking apart in pain. It was a scream of someone alive and hurting. I slowed the truck, my headlights sliding across the tree line. The woods pressed against the road here, thick pines and tangled brush, black walls on either side of the narrow asphalt. I stopped completely, hands still gripping the wheel, waiting to hear it again. At first there was nothing, just the kind of silence that feels heavy, as if the night itself is holding its breath. Then another scream tore through, closer this time, high and ragged, breaking halfway through like the lungs couldn't even finish pushing it out. Every part of me said to drive, to keep going. But my foot stayed stuck on the brake and my hands wouldn't turn the wheel. Something about hearing a sound like that and then pretending it didn't exist felt impossible. I put the truck in park and grabbed the flashlight from the seat beside me. The beam cut a sharp white line into the trees when I stepped out. The air was colder than I expected, damp, smelling of pine needles and wet soil. The sound of my boots crunching against the gravel shoulder felt too loud. I shined the light into the trees and stepped forward. The beam caught branches and thick brush, showing me how tight the woods really were. It wasn't the kind of place you wanted to go walking at night. I scanned side to side, moving the beam in wide arcs, but everything looked the same. Black trunks, shadowed spaces between them, tangles of undergrowth. Then it came again, the scream, and this time I knew it was further in. Maybe 100 yards or more from the road. I pushed forward. The ground sloped uneven, soft under my boots with roots grabbing at my ankles as I moved. Every step seemed louder than it should have been. My flashlight beam shook with the tremor in my hand, darting across bark and brush, sometimes catching on patches of mist that seemed to drift low to the ground. The scream came again, shorter this time, more like a gasp. Then there was another sound, muffled like movement, like someone stumbling or being dragged. The deeper I went, the thicker the air felt, as if the trees were closing in, swallowing the light and the sound. My breath was harsh in my ears. I had the sense that I was leaving the world behind, trading the thin safety of the road for something heavier, darker, something I couldn't easily turn back from. My boots caught on a root and I stumbled forward, almost losing the flashlight, but I caught myself, panting, staring into the dark ahead. Then the beam caught it, a patch of white, cloth torn, stuck to a bush. I moved closer, lifting the branch, and saw it was a shirt sleeve, ripped clean off, edges frayed as if it had been torn in a rush. It was damp, stained, darker in places I didn't want to think too much about. My stomach turned, but I forced myself to push on, moving in the direction it had been caught. The screams had stopped now. That was worse than hearing them. The silence pressed in heavy. I felt the weight of every step, every breath. Then I heard something else. Not a scream this time, but a low sound like groaning, like someone trying to speak but too weak to get the words out. It pulled me forward faster than I wanted to go. The flashlight beam hit something on the ground, a shoe. Lying sideways, laces torn, dirt ground deep into it. I swung the beam forward and saw a leg, stretched out behind a bush. Then the shape of a whole body crumpled against the earth. My breath caught. It was a man. His clothes torn. His skin scraped raw in places, dark stains soaking his shirt. His chest was rising shallow, fast, like he was fighting just to pull air in. His face was turned away, hidden by shadows, but I could hear the low sound coming from him. The broken attempts at making noise. I froze, every instinct telling me this was wrong, that I shouldn't be here, but I couldn't move. The sound of him struggling to breathe was enough to glue my feet to the dirt. My flashlight flicked across the ground and I saw the drag marks. Deep grooves in the soil where his heels had torn through, lines pulling back further into the trees. I realized then that he hadn't come here on his own. Something or someone had dragged him here. The groaning stopped. His chest wasn't rising anymore. I stood there in the silence, the flashlight trembling in my hand, and I felt something shift in the dark around me. Not sound exactly, but movement. The sense of being watched. The kind that sinks into your skin before your brain even has time to understand it. I wanted to run. Every muscle screamed to turn and push back toward the road, but I knew the way I'd come had twisted. The woods had swallowed the path behind me. My only choice was forward, following those drag marks deeper. The further I went, the clearer they became. They weren't just marks of someone being dragged once. They crisscrossed, overlapping, some deeper than others, as if many had been pulled through here, not just one. The dirt was churned, the leaves crushed. My stomach tightened as I pushed the light ahead. Then I smelled it. A thick metallic scent that clung to the back of my throat. The flashlight caught on dark patches smeared across the leaves, fresh and wet. The drag marks ended at a clearing. My light swept across it and froze. There were more of them, bodies. Some whole, some not. Scattered across the clearing like discarded clothes. The ground was dark and wet, patches of it glistening. My throat locked, and my breath came fast and shallow. I could feel my pulse hammering in my skull, and then I heard it again. Not a scream this time, not groaning. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate, moving just beyond the edge of the clearing, circling. The beam of my light shook as I swung it toward the sound, but all I saw were trees. I turned, scanning, trying to keep every angle covered, but the sound was everywhere. Crunching leaves, shifting brush. Whoever or whatever had done this was still here. My heart hammered so hard I thought my ribs would crack. I could barely breathe. I knew if I stayed, I would end up like the bodies on the ground. I killed the flashlight. The dark swallowed me whole, but it was better than being a target. My ears strained, following the sound of those steps. I dropped low, pressing myself against the dirt, crawling toward where I thought the trees opened back toward the road. Every move was slow, careful, each breath shallow. The footsteps grew louder, closer, pausing at times as if listening. I pressed my face into the soil, the smell of earth filling my nose, and stayed still. My whole body trembled, but I forced myself to wait until the steps shifted again, moving in the other direction. Then I crawled, inch by inch, until I felt the ground start to rise. I don't know how long it took me to find the road again. My knees were torn, my hands raw, my clothes soaked with sweat and dirt. When I saw the faint silver of the asphalt through the trees, I nearly broke. I stumbled the last few feet, crashing out onto the shoulder, gasping. My truck was still there, engine off, sitting in the silence. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands shook so bad I dropped the keys twice before I jammed them into the ignition. The engine roared to life and I floored it, tires spitting gravel as I shot down the road. The radio was still dead, nothing but silence. But as the truck picked up speed, the screams started again. Not behind me in the woods, not outside, from somewhere deeper ahead, carried on the wind, faint but real. I didn't stop again. I drove until the trees thinned, until the horizon started to glow with the first hints of dawn, until the road connected back to something that looked alive. I never reported what I saw. I never spoke of it again. But even now, sometimes, when the night is quiet enough, I can still hear the radio go silent in my head. And then the screaming starts, and I know it was real. I had been driving for hours on the back roads with nothing but the radio keeping me company. The night was long and heavy, the kind of dark that felt thicker than usual, swallowing up the thin beam of my headlights as if it was never enough. The road was narrow, barely holding 2 lanes and lined on both sides by thick woods that pressed in so close I could see the outlines of branches stretching overhead like bony arms. It was past midnight, and I hadn't seen another car in almost an hour. That should have been comforting, but instead the silence outside the car made me uneasy. The radio had been playing low, some local station fading in and out. It was scratchy and thin, but it was something. It gave me a sense that I wasn't entirely alone on that empty road. The songs were old, some static cutting through them, and every few minutes the voice of a late-night DJ would break in, low and bored. That voice kept me awake. Without it, I might have dozed off, lulled by the endless winding asphalt and the hum of my tires. But then the radio went silent. At first I thought it was just more static, so I turned the dial a little, twisting it back and forth, hoping to find the signal again. Nothing but empty white noise. I smacked the side of the radio with my hand, the way you do when electronics misbehave. But it stayed quiet. It wasn't even static anymore, just silence. That silence was wrong. Radios don't just go silent. And that was when I heard the first scream. It was faint, almost lost under the rumble of my car. But I heard it. A sharp cry, high and cut short, like someone in pain. I froze, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. I told myself it must have been my imagination. Maybe even something the car made when I hit a bump. But then it came again, louder, clearer. A scream, raw and human, tearing out from the woods on my right. I slowed down without even realizing I was pressing the brake. My headlights brushed across the trees, but there was nothing there except thick black trunks and the empty road ahead. My windows were rolled up, but the sound was so sharp, it felt like it cut through the glass, like the screams were meant for me. Then came another one, this time from the left side of the road, a different voice, deeper, shouting in panic. I gripped the wheel hard, my arms stiff, and I realized my heart was racing faster than the car. I pulled over to the side, engine idling, headlights shining on the dark stretch of road ahead. The air outside looked so heavy I didn't want to open the door. I just sat there listening. The woods were alive with noise now, screams overlapping, some high-pitched, some low, some broken into sobs that ended in choking gasps. They weren't faint anymore. They were right there at the edge of the trees, pouring out like a crowd was hidden just out of reach of my lights. But the road was empty. I couldn't move. Every scream scraped against me, clawed at my nerves. There were so many voices, it felt impossible they weren't right in front of me. But the trees remained dark and unmoving. I leaned closer to the wheel, squinting into the black, trying to make out shapes. Nothing. Just the endless line of trees. I thought about rolling down the window to hear better, but something deep inside me told me not to. It was like some instinct I couldn't ignore. If I let that noise in any clearer, I'd regret it. The screams didn't stop. They didn't even pause. They layered over each other, men and women. Sometimes short bursts, sometimes long wails that went on until I thought the person must run out of breath. But then another one would take its place. It wasn't random. It was constant. I don't know how long I sat there gripping the wheel, staring out at the woods, but it felt like hours. My legs had gone stiff, my throat dry. I finally forced myself to move. I pushed my foot down hard on the gas and the car lurched forward, tires spitting gravel as I got back onto the road. The screams followed. At first I thought I was leaving them behind. The sound thinned out as the car picked up speed, the night swallowing the noise. Relief crept in, like maybe I had just stopped in the wrong place at the wrong time and now it was behind me. But then I heard it again, just as loud as before, even though I was miles down the road. The voices hadn't stayed behind. I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing but my red taillights reflecting off the asphalt and trees rushing past. No headlights following me. No people running behind me. Yet the screams stayed with me, pouring in from all directions as if they were carried on the air itself. My chest tightened, panic crawling through me as I drove faster. I pushed the car harder than I ever had on a road like that. Twisting turns, tires skidding a little on the edges. But still, the sound stayed with me. It was unbearable. Every second I expected something to burst out of the trees into my headlights. Some shape broken and bloody stumbling onto the road. But it never happened. The woods stayed empty, only their voices leaking out. My radio was still dead. The silence from it made everything worse. Before, the music and chatter had been thin but human. Now all I had was the screaming outside. I wanted to turn back. Part of me thought I should go find help, go back to the last gas station or small town I passed. But another part of me knew I couldn't face the road behind me. The thought of going back through that stretch where I first heard them made me sick. The only option was forward, so I drove. I drove until the road blurred, my eyes stinging, my hands slick on the wheel. The screams never faded. They would get louder sometimes, like whoever it was had come right up beside my car, running alongside me through the woods. I would glance that way, heart slamming, but nothing was there. Just black trees and shadows. At some point I realized I was crying. My throat was tight, tears burning my eyes, but I couldn't stop. It wasn't sadness, it was something else. Pure pressure, fear building so much it had to leak out somehow. The road stretched on endlessly. My gas tank dropped lower and lower, and that was when a new terror hit me. What if I ran out of fuel out here? I'd have to stop. I'd be trapped, stuck listening to those voices closing in. I pressed the pedal harder, trying to make the next town before it was too late. But no town came. The gauge dropped into the red. The light blinked on, mocking me. I kept driving until the engine coughed, sputtered, and finally died. My car coasted forward a few feet before rolling to a stop on the side of the road. The screams never paused. I sat there, frozen, in the dead car. Headlights dimming, dashboard fading, the world closing in on me. My chest felt like it was collapsing. I wanted to run, but where? Into the woods where the voices came from? Down the empty road with no idea how far the next house or station was? For the first time, I rolled the window down. Just an inch, but it was enough. The screams hit me like a wave. They weren't muffled anymore. They were right there, crashing into the car. Men, women, some young, some old, all crying out in terror and pain in ways I didn't think people could scream. It was so loud I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just outside. It was inside me, vibrating through my bones. I shut the window fast, but the damage was done. Now, even with it closed, I couldn't tell if the voices were outside or inside my own head. They were everywhere. Hours passed like that. I don't know how I stayed in that car without losing my mind. My body was locked up, shaking, cold sweat soaking my clothes. Every second felt like it would be the one where something finally came out of the woods, dragged me out, made me part of the screaming chorus. But nothing ever did. When dawn came, pale light bleeding through the trees, the voices finally stopped. Just like the radio, they cut off. One moment they were there, the next gone. The silence was sudden and complete, almost as sharp as the noise had been. I sat in the quiet, not trusting it. My body was so tired it felt broken. I wanted to collapse, to sleep, but I didn't dare. Not until I was out of there. So I opened the door, stepped onto the road, and started walking. My legs felt weak, but they carried me forward. I walked for miles until I finally found a gas station. The man behind the counter looked at me like I had crawled out of a grave. Clothes were soaked, my eyes bloodshot, my face pale. I didn't tell him what I heard. I didn't tell anyone. I just bought a gas can, filled it, and went back for my car. When I reached it, the radio was on again. But I couldn't bring myself to touch it. I never drove that road again. And sometimes late at night when the world is quiet, I swear I can still hear them. The screams, thin and distant, waiting just beyond the silence. I had been driving for hours, the kind of endless stretch of road where the trees all looked the same, and the daylight seemed to fade faster than usual. The hum of my car engine had become background noise, steady and dull, and the only thing keeping me sane was the radio. It wasn't even a good station, just static-filled music broken up by weak signals from local broadcasters I didn't recognize. I didn't care. It was something. something to fill the silence. I remember adjusting the dial carefully, trying to keep the faint voice of a man reading out the evening news from drowning completely in static. He was talking about weather patterns and some local accident that had shut down a road miles away. I wasn't paying much attention, but it was a comfort to know there was another human voice out there. Even if it was through a weak crackling signal, the air outside was cooling fast, and the light had gone from pale yellow to that dim bluish gray that makes the woods on either side of the road look endless and hollow. My eyes were growing heavy, and I caught myself yawning again and again. I wanted to pull over somewhere, but there was nowhere. No rest stops, no gas stations, not even a proper clearing. Just the same trees, the same dirt shoulder, the same unbroken stretch of blacktop. Then it happened. The radio cut out. No warning. No slow fade, just dead silence. I fiddled with the knob, thinking maybe I had gone out of range of the station. But the dial gave me nothing. No static, no faint crackle, nothing. Just a low hum from the car itself. My stomach tightened. It was such a small thing, but in that moment it felt wrong, like the air itself had grown heavy around me. And then I heard it. Screams. Not through the radio, not in my imagination. Out there in the dark. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe coyotes, but no. These were human. Sharp, high-pitched, strained in that way that made your chest seize up just hearing it. Someone was in pain. Someone was terrified. The sound carried strangely, bouncing through the trees like it could have been 50 feet away or 100. I slowed the car to a crawl, heart pounding. The headlights barely cut through the trees, but I leaned forward in my seat, straining to see. The screams came again, louder this time, overlapping more than one voice. I couldn't make out words, just raw noise, raw terror. I wanted to keep driving. Every instinct told me to keep going, but my hands betrayed me. I was pulling onto the dirt shoulder, putting the car in park, listening. The woods had swallowed the screams again, leaving behind only the ticking of my cooling engine and my own uneven breathing. I sat there for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel, waiting. Then they came again, louder, clearer. This time there was no mistaking it. Men, women, maybe even a child, all tangled together in one long, drawn-out wail. I could feel the sound crawling under my skin. I opened the door before I even realized I had decided to. The cool night air rushed against me, carrying a damp, earthy smell. I stepped out, leaving the car running, headlights spilling into the road. My ears strained, trying to pin down the direction. To the right, deeper into the woods. I walked around the car, gravel crunching under my boots, and stood at the edge of the tree line. It was darker there, the kind of black that swallows light whole. I tried to tell myself not to go in. I tried to tell myself it wasn't my business. But when the screams rose again, sharper, desperate, I couldn't stop my legs. I stepped into the woods. The ground was soft, damp with fallen leaves and old pine needles. My shoes sank into it with a muffled sound, and each step seemed louder than it should have been. My eyes darted everywhere, trying to adjust, catching bits of pale bark, twisted roots, glimmers of wet stone. The screams seemed closer now, though they rose and fell like they were being carried by the wind. I pushed deeper, branches brushing against my jacket, catching at my arms. My breathing was shallow. The silence between the screams was almost worse, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. I don't know how long I walked before I saw it. A faint glow. Not white, not yellow, but a sickly orange, like firelight through smoke. I crouched instinctively and crept closer. The sound was clearer now. Not just screaming, but crying, whimpering, muffled groans. I moved from tree to tree, keeping myself hidden as best I could, until the glow finally opened up into a clearing. My stomach turned. There were people. At least half a dozen, maybe more, on the ground. Some were tied, some slumped, some barely moving. Their faces were pale, streaked with dirt and blood, their clothes torn. They weren't screaming now, just moaning weakly. The screaming came from one of them, a woman thrashing against her restraints, her voice cracking as it tore through the night. And standing around them were men. 3 of them, maybe 4. In dark jackets, their faces shadowed by the light of a fire they had built in the center of the clearing. They moved with purpose, checking ropes, dragging limp bodies closer to the flames. One of them had something in his hand, a knife, long thin, shining in the firelight. My whole body locked up. I wanted to turn and run, to vanish back into the trees, but my legs wouldn't move. I just crouched there, barely breathing, watching. One of the men grabbed the woman who had been screaming, dragging her closer to the fire. Her screams pitched higher, breaking into sobs, kicking wildly against the ground. The others didn't even look at her. They kept working, like this was routine, like this was nothing new to them. My stomach twisted. My mind screamed at me to leave, but another part of me, the part that couldn't accept what I was seeing, kept me there. These weren't random woods anymore. This wasn't just a broken radio. This was something I wasn't meant to find. I backed up slowly, one step then another, keeping my eyes on them, terrified of snapping a twig or crunching leaves too loudly. My hands shook so hard I could barely hold on to the tree I leaned against. Then, in the middle of another step, my heel caught on a root. The crack was loud, every head turned. The woman kept screaming, thrashing harder now, but the men froze. Their faces lifted, shadowed in the firelight, and they stared directly toward the trees. Directly toward me. I bolted. Branches tore at my clothes, slapped against my face, roots threatened to trip me with every step. My breath came ragged, my chest burning, my legs pumping harder than they ever had. Behind me I heard shouting, not the terrified cries of victims, but sharp, angry shouts. Orders, they were chasing me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I could do was run toward the faint memory of the road, the faint hum of my car engine I hoped was still idling where I left it. My lungs screamed. My vision blurred with sweat and tears, but I kept going. The shouts grew closer, branches snapping under heavier, faster steps. They knew the woods better than I did. They were gaining. Finally, I saw the faint glow of headlights through the trees. My car, still there, engine still running, beams cutting across the empty road. I burst out of the woods, stumbling onto the gravel shoulder, and sprinted for the door. I dove in, slammed it shut, and threw the car into gear. The tires squealed against the dirt before gripping asphalt, the headlights bouncing wildly as I shot forward down the road. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of them. Figures bursting out of the trees, arms raised, faces twisted with rage. They didn't stop at the tree line. They ran into the road, chasing after me, until the distance swallowed them. I didn't stop driving, not for miles, not until the woods thinned and the faint glow of a town appeared on the horizon. Even then, my hands shook so badly I could barely steer. I pulled into a gas station, lights buzzing overhead, the smell of fuel sharp in the air. I parked under the brightest light I could find and sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to calm the storm in my chest. The screams still echoed in my head. The silence on the radio still pressed against my ears. I should have called someone. I should have reported it. But when I reached for my phone, it was gone. Somewhere in those woods I had lost it. I never drove that road again, but I still hear it. Every time I sit in silence, every time the radio cuts out or the static grows too thick, I hear them. The screams don't stop, not in my head. And I know that somewhere in the dark woods along that empty road, they never stopped in reality either, because I left them there, and the radio never came back on. The radio went silent, but the screams didn't. I remember that night in such sharp detail that sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear the static fading out and the sound that came after. It happened in late September, when the air had that heavy chill at night, but the days still felt warm. I was in the middle of a long solo drive, heading north through endless stretches of forest. The trip had been on my calendar for weeks. I wanted quiet. I wanted the road. I wanted time away from my phone and the noise of the city. I started the drive late in the afternoon, carrying a cooler in the back seat with a couple bottles of water and a sandwich. Nothing more. I had my sleeping bag too, just in case I didn't reach the small motel I'd marked on the map. The roads out here weren't busy. In fact, after passing the last town, I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. Trees closed in on both sides of the road, their branches heavy and dark. making it feel more like a tunnel than an open highway. The further I drove, the more isolated I felt. The radio had been my company. It wasn't playing much, just some faint local stations. Static cutting in and out. A patchwork of voices and old songs. But when you're alone for that long, even static feels like something human. Something alive to fill the silence. I had the volume low, just enough to know it was there. It happened suddenly. The radio hissed, crackled once, then went completely silent. No fade, no noise, just a dead empty stop. My hand went to the knob automatically, adjusting it, scanning stations, but nothing came through. Only silence. I remember glancing at the dashboard clock. It was 9:17 p.m. The only sound left was the low hum of my tires on asphalt. I leaned back in my seat, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe the signal just died out this far from town. I tried to enjoy the silence, but then I heard it. Faint at first, almost something I thought I imagined. A scream. It wasn't on the radio. It wasn't coming from my car. It came from somewhere outside, beyond the glass, beyond the steady whir of the wheels. I froze, hands tight on the steering wheel, my whole body stiffening. The scream rose, long and sharp, breaking in the middle like someone had run out of air. Then another scream followed, further away, muffled by the dense trees but still clear enough to know it was real. I slowed the car, unsure if I had really heard it. The sound had a rawness to it that no animal could make. It was human. My headlights cut through the road ahead, but it showed nothing but trees. My instinct told me not to stop, not to get out, but something made me roll the window down an inch. The cold air rushed in, carrying the faintest echo of more screaming. It wasn't constant. It came in bursts, like different voices overlapping. Some high, some low, all filled with pain. I could hear them twisting through the trees, carried on the wind, disappearing and returning. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I pressed the gas and drove faster, but the screams didn't fade. For miles they seemed to follow me, always drifting from the woods, never clear enough to place, but never distant enough to ignore. The road was empty, no lights, no cars, nothing but that sound. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles were white, forcing myself not to look into the forest, afraid of what I might see between the trees. 10 minutes must have passed before I spotted something ahead. A faint orange glow, barely visible through the branches. I slowed the car again, squinting at it. At first I thought it was just a campfire, but as I drew closer, the glow grew brighter, stronger, flickering. It was fire, but not a small one. The orange light licked upward, lighting the tips of the trees. My gut twisted. I pulled the car over, leaving the engine running, headlights washing over the dirt shoulder. The screams were louder now, but they mixed with something else. Shouting, frantic, but still no words I could make out. I sat there frozen, debating if I should keep driving. But something pulled at me, something that told me I needed to see. I turned off the headlights, leaving only the faint dash glow inside the car. I grabbed the flashlight from my glove compartment, stepped out, and felt the cold air slam against my face. The silence of the car made the screams seem even louder, echoing through the night. I followed the dirt shoulder until I found a narrow trail leading off the road. Branches scraped my arms as I moved, the light bouncing with every step. The smell hit me before I saw it. Smoke, sharp and heavy, mixed with something else, something bitter and metallic. When the trees opened into a small clearing, I stopped dead. A fire burned in the middle of the space, flames licking at wood piled too high, sparks shooting upward into the dark. Around it, scattered on the ground, were shapes. At first I thought they were bags, gear maybe, but as my light caught them I saw faces. People. They were lying on the ground, some still, some moving weakly, their mouths opening and closing in broken cries. There were maybe 6 or 7 of them, clothes torn, dirt smeared across their skin. The screaming came from them. One man lay on his side, clutching his stomach, rocking back and forth. A woman crawled with her elbows, her legs twisted in a way that made my stomach turn. Another figure closer to the fire was face down, unmoving. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my grip. My throat closed up. I wanted to call out, to help, but fear pinned me where I stood. That's when I noticed something else. Not far from the fire, half hidden in the shadows, stood a man. He was tall, broad, dressed in dark clothes, his face barely visible under the hood of a jacket. He held something in his hands, long, metallic, glinting in the firelight. An axe. My heart lurched and I ducked down, pressing myself into the brush. My breathing was too loud. I was sure he'd hear me. I killed my flashlight, letting the darkness swallow me. I listened. The man moved slowly around the fire, glancing at the people on the ground. One tried to lift themselves, but the man stepped closer, and the scream that came next was so piercing, I covered my mouth with my hand. He didn't strike them, not then, but he leaned over, said something I couldn't hear, and pushed the figure back down with his boot. The smell of smoke clung to me, burning my throat. Stayed low, watching, unable to move. Minutes passed, maybe more. My knees ached from crouching, but I didn't dare shift. At some point, I noticed something new. A vehicle parked deeper in the clearing, an old truck with its bed loaded. Even in the firelight, I could see it wasn't just tools or supplies. There were ropes, tarps, and something large wrapped tightly in black plastic. The screaming never fully stopped. It rose and fell, sometimes sharp, sometimes weak. But it was constant enough that the sound buried itself in my chest, vibrating through me. I realized then that I had stumbled into something I should never have seen. I forced myself back, inch by inch, careful not to snap a branch underfoot. The man with the axe circled the fire again, his shadow stretching across the clearing. I kept moving until the trees swallowed the firelight, and I was back on the narrow trail. When I reached the road, I ran to my car, hands shaking so badly I dropped the flashlight on the ground. I picked it up, threw myself into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The sound of it roared too loud, like it would draw attention. I flicked the headlights on and tore down the road, tires spitting gravel. The screams didn't fade. Somehow they stayed with me as if they were inside my head. I drove for what felt like hours, every shadow between the trees twisting into the shape of a figure. My hands gripped the wheel so tight they cramped. Finally, I saw lights, real ones from a gas station at the edge of another small town. I pulled in, slammed the brakes, and stumbled out of the car. I couldn't explain what I had seen, not in any clear words. I didn't call anyone that night. I sat in my car under the fluorescent lights of the station until morning, watching the door, waiting for that man with the axe to come walking through the trees after me. I never turned the radio on again during that trip. I left the town the next day, heading in the opposite direction, and never told anyone about the clearing in the woods, the fire, the truck, or the screams. Sometimes I still wonder who those people were, what happened to them, and why the radio cut out just before I heard it all. But what I know for certain is this: silence isn't always safe. Because the night the radio went quiet, the screaming began, and it hasn't left me since. I always liked the quiet at night. It made me feel separate from everything, like the world slowed down enough for me to notice small things. That night was one of those nights. I was parked just off an old dirt road, miles outside the last small town I had passed, sitting in my truck with the radio on low. The signal wasn't perfect, but it was enough to give me a little company while I sipped coffee from a thermos and tried to keep myself awake. I had been on the road since the afternoon, driving toward the mountains, thinking I'd find a place to camp before morning. The only problem was the road stretched longer than I thought, with fewer clearings and fewer signs of life. I hadn't seen another car for over an hour, and the dirt track I was on barely seemed traveled. The night air outside was heavy and warm, and the only real sound was the steady hum of insects and the faint static of the radio. The announcer's voice crackled in and out, sometimes clear, sometimes lost in noise, but it was better than silence. At least it felt like proof that I wasn't the only person out there, that somewhere, not too far away, people were awake, talking, going about their lives. It made the stretch of woods around me feel less empty. Then, without warning, the radio went silent. The man's voice just stopped mid-sentence, cut off like someone had pulled a plug. At first, I thought it was just the signal fading, something that happened often when driving through hills or woods. I leaned forward, adjusting the dial, trying to bring it back, but all I got was pure static, like the hiss of dead air. The strange part wasn't the silence of the radio. It was what came after. The static faded down, almost unnaturally fast until there was nothing but a thin buzz, and then that too cut off. For a few seconds, I thought maybe the station had just gone out completely. My hand was still on the dial when I heard it. Something faint, something behind the quiet, screams. They didn't come from outside the truck. They didn't come from the trees. They came through the radio, sharp and distant at first, then closer, like someone was caught on the other end of the frequency. Their voice dragged raw with terror. My whole body stiffened when I heard it, because there was no mistaking the sound. A man shouting, his words broken apart, turning into strained howls. A second later, another voice, higher, faster, panicked, screaming over his. I froze with my hand still on the radio, my eyes locked on the little green light that glowed beneath the dial. The truck felt smaller, the cab pressing in on me. The screams kept coming, cutting through with static, twisting in and out like the connection was broken. But the tone in them was clear, pure panic. My first thought was maybe it was some emergency broadcast, some kind of accident being picked up, but I'd never heard anything like it. There was no warning message, no announcement, no background noise of operators or dispatchers, just screaming, filling the airwaves, forcing its way into my head. It went on for what felt like minutes. The voices rose and fell, sometimes clear enough to hear gasps for breath, other times muffled like they were dragged away from whatever microphone was picking them up. At one point, I was sure I heard something pounding, dull thuds between the shouts, like fists against wood or metal. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to make sense of it. My mind ran through explanations. Maybe it was some sick prank, someone hijacking the signal. Maybe it was a recording, an old tape being played to mess with people. But the way those voices sounded, the way the strain cracked through every shout, it didn't feel like a recording. It felt real. Then it stopped. The radio cut out so suddenly that I almost jerked in my seat. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I stared at the dial, twisting it back and forth, searching for anything. But it was gone. Nothing but the faintest hiss of static. My own breathing sounded too loud in the cab. I should have left then. I should have turned the key, driven back the way I came, and not stopped until I was under real lights again, with people around me and proof that the world was normal. But I didn't. Something in me wanted to know what I had just heard. Curiosity mixed with unease, pulling me in two directions. I told myself maybe someone was hurt. Maybe it was a call that got picked up by accident. Maybe, somehow, someone nearby needed help. The woods outside looked the same as they had an hour ago. Dark walls of trees pressing against the edge of the road, their branches swaying lightly in the night breeze. The dirt road stretched on in front of me, my headlights cutting a short tunnel through the dark. I didn't want to stay still, not after what I had just heard. So I put the truck in gear and rolled forward. The road narrowed as I went, branches brushing the sides of the truck, the crunch of gravel under the tires sharp in the silence. My eyes kept flicking back to the radio, half expecting it to come back to life, but it stayed dead. No music, no voice, nothing. A mile, maybe two, passed before I saw the first sign that something was wrong. The beam of my headlights caught it on the side of the road. An old backpack, dirty, torn at one strap, lying half in the ditch. I slowed down, staring at it as I passed. It looked like it had been there a while, but not long enough to be eaten away by weather. The fabric still held shape. I tried to convince myself it could have fallen off someone's truck, maybe a hunter or hiker. But the way it was lying there, open and half spilled, it didn't look like an accident. I drove on, gripping the wheel tighter. Another 100 yards and there was more. A shoe in the road, mud caked across the side. Then further up, a jacket caught on a low branch, the sleeve hanging down like an arm reaching for the ground. I pressed the accelerator harder, my pulse kicking in my ears. The night air felt heavy inside the truck now, like it was pushing against my chest. The road dipped down into a hollow, the trees closing in so tightly that the beams of my headlights barely stretched more than a dozen feet ahead. And that was when I saw it. A vehicle. It was off to the side, tilted in the ditch, its front end smashed into a tree. The metal was buckled, the windshield fractured into a web of cracks. It looked fresh. The headlights were still faintly glowing, one of them shattered, the other dim. The sight made me slam the brakes, the truck shuddering as I stopped. I sat there, engine idling, staring at it. The first thought that cut through my head was accident. Someone had gone off the road, crashed, and maybe that was what I had picked up on the radio. Someone calling out, trying to get help. It would explain the backpack, the shoe, the jacket. It made sense in the most terrifying way. But when I stepped out of my truck, the air hit me in a way that didn't feel right. It was still, almost too still, and hot against my skin. I could hear insects, but fainter now, as if even they were holding back. My boots crunched on gravel as I walked toward the wreck. The grass around the car was bent, trampled, like there had been movement. The closer I got, the clearer the details became. The car door on the driver's side was open, hanging at an angle. Inside, the seats were torn. The dashboard cracked from the impact. But there was no one inside. That was when I noticed the marks. On the dirt just beyond the open door. Faint tracks, smudges where shoes had dug in. Streaks in the soil as if someone had been dragged or had crawled, moving away from the wreck. My stomach turned as I followed them with my eyes. They led off the road into the trees, swallowed by the darkness. The screams on the radio came back into my mind then, vivid, alive, twisting through the silence. I didn't want to follow, but my eyes kept pulling toward that line of tracks. The trees seemed deeper than they had before, the spaces between them too narrow, the dark beyond them too solid. I stood there for too long, listening, waiting, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Then I heard something. Not from the radio, not from the truck. From the trees, a crack of a branch. Low, heavy, something moving. My legs reacted before my mind did. I backed toward my truck, heart hammering, every part of me screaming to get inside, to leave. The sound came again, closer this time, not rushed but steady, deliberate. I climbed back into the cab, slammed the door and locked it. My headlights stayed fixed on the wreck, pale beams washing over the torn metal. Nothing moved in them, but the trees beyond swayed gently as if something had just passed between them. I shifted into reverse, the tires spinning for a second on the gravel before catching. The truck lurched back, the beam of my light sliding away from the wreck, casting shadows across the trees. For a moment I thought I saw a shape, tall, wrong, hunched just at the edge of the light. But then it was gone, swallowed by the dark. I didn't wait. I spun the wheel, turned the truck back the way I came, and floored the accelerator. The engine roared. The gravel spit out behind me, and the narrow road stretched ahead in a blur of dirt and shadow. For miles I didn't look back. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, eyes locked on the road, every muscle straining as if letting go for even a second would let the dark around me close in. The radio stayed silent. Not even static now. Just dead, like it had never worked at all. I didn't stop until the dirt road met pavement again. The first time I noticed something was wrong was the silence on the radio. I was driving back from a long shift, a late-night haul that had kept me out on the road longer than I planned. The cab of my truck had been filled with the steady hum of the radio for hours. A local station that usually played music and random chatter from a tired night DJ. It had been the only thing keeping me awake on the dark, empty stretch of road that cut through the woods. The signal wasn't always strong out here, but usually I could pick up something, even if it was just static. That night, though, the static broke. It was mid-song, then nothing but silence. I tapped the radio like it was just a loose connection. The screen still showed the frequency, but no sound came out, not even static. At first, I thought it was just the radio itself failing, maybe a blown fuse. I let it go. The sound of my tires on the asphalt, the low rumble of the engine, it was enough. The night was heavy and quiet otherwise, the kind of silence that pressed in from the dark woods that seemed endless on either side. Then I heard it. It wasn't inside the cab. It wasn't the truck. It was outside. A scream. It was faint at first, like it had been far off. Just a thin sound cutting across the night. I froze when I heard it, my hand gripping the wheel tighter. I slowed the truck a little, scanning the trees on both sides, but everything was just dark. The scream came again, clearer this time, sharp, ragged. Not the kind of scream that comes from someone joking or yelling to get attention. It was the kind of scream that comes from pain. I pulled over almost without thinking. My headlights cut across the road and spilled into the trees ahead. Pale beams swallowed quickly by the woods. I killed the engine, rolled the window down, and listened. The scream came again. This time it was closer. It sent a chill straight through me. The kind of chill that feels like it presses into your bones. I knew stopping was stupid. Out here in the middle of nowhere, nothing good ever comes from following a sound like that. People get themselves killed for being curious, for thinking they can help. But something about the rawness of that scream made me feel like I couldn't just leave it. I grabbed the flashlight I kept under the seat. My boots hit the gravel on the shoulder of the road. The night air was colder than I expected. The only sound now was the cooling metal of the truck and the wind moving slow through the trees. I clicked on the flashlight. The narrow beam pushed back the dark only a few feet. I stepped off the road. The ground dipped uneven, soft dirt and leaves giving way underfoot. Branches reached low, catching my arms and jacket. I moved toward where I thought the scream had come from, my heartbeat thudding so loud it filled my head. Every step made me more aware of how alone I was out here. Then I heard it again. Not one scream this time. Several. It was like more than one person. Voices tangled, cutting through the night with different pitches but the same kind of pain. High, sharp, broken. My stomach turned cold. I froze. The flashlight trembling in my hand, and I realized my first thought wasn't about helping anymore. It was about surviving. I crouched low without even thinking. The screams rose again, then fell into silence. The woods went still, like they had swallowed everything. I felt exposed. The beam of my flashlight giving away my position like a target. I shut it off and let the dark wrap around me. I crouched there, listening. At first I thought it was over, but then I heard something else. Movement, not in front of me, but to the side. Slow, deliberate steps on the ground. Weight shifting, branches snapping. Someone was walking through the trees. I stayed still. My breath was shallow, forced through my nose so it wouldn't be heard. The footsteps got closer, steady, not rushed. Whoever it was, they weren't panicked. They were calm. That made it worse. I lowered myself flat to the ground. Dirt and leaves pressed into my face. The smell of soil filled my nose. I turned my head just enough to see faint movement between the trees. A shape. Too dark to make out details, but tall. Human. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the screams. I lay there, heart hammering, praying they hadn't seen me. Minutes passed like hours. I thought maybe I was safe, that they had moved on. But then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the radio, not mine, not from my truck. But the same kind of faint crackle, a burst of static. Then a voice, low, muttering something I couldn't make out. It wasn't coming from far away either. It was close. The figure moved again, pacing, the radio crackling every few seconds. Then a voice came through clear, not screaming this time, talking, orders, calm, clipped. I couldn't understand the words, but I understood the tone. Whoever it was, they weren't alone. That was when I realized the screams I had heard weren't random. They weren't accidents. They had been people caught out here, and whoever was carrying that radio was part of it. I stayed there for as long as I could, not daring to move until the footsteps faded, and the crackle of the radio drifted off into the trees. When I finally forced myself to get up, my legs were weak. I moved back the way I had come, slow, silent, flashlight off. My truck sat on the road like salvation. I got back inside, locked the doors, started the engine, and pulled away as fast as I could without peeling out. The radio in my truck was still dead, silent, but for miles down that road, with the dark woods pressing close on both sides, I could swear I still heard faint echoes of screams. Not in the cab, not from the speakers, From the trees. From out there, somewhere in the dark, where people had screamed and no one had ever come back out. When I finally hit the lights of a small gas station an hour later, I stopped and sat behind the wheel for a long time before I could even step inside. The clerk barely looked at me when I bought coffee. He didn't notice my hand still shaking. I never told anyone what I heard out there. Not the silence on the radio, not the screams, not the figure with the radio calm while people screamed. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And I know that stretch of road will never be just empty woods again in my mind. Somewhere out there the radio went silent, but the screams didn't, and I don't think they ever will.